It was all systems go in the 77 Squadron hangars this morning as its personnel put into action the mission they've spent months planning. By this time tomorrow, the 20 pilots, 12 Hornets and extensive support and maintenance crews will be at the US Clark Air Base near Manila. Also there, crack US F-15 and F-16 squads flown in from around the world. All will immediately begin working together on their initial combat tactics before launching headlong into the gruelling Cope Thunder exercise. 14 days of air-to-air and air-to-ground warfare.
Well, hopefully we're going to be very busy and it will require a lot of preparation and work from everyone to achieve the aims of the exercise and each particular sortie. So there should be a lot of work involved for it.
How much planning had to go into this exercise?
Several months. From all aspects, administration as well as preparation on the operational side.
The Australians will fight side by side with the Americans and against other Australians in a bid to expand their knowledge of fighting. And according to pilot Flight Lieutenant Steve Smith, with the recent events in the Gulf fresh in their minds, motivation is certain to be at a high.
It shouldn't necessarily give any further edge to it. However, we may see slight changes due to lessons that have been learnt from the Gulf War.
Also setting out today, 6 Mackeys of the 76 Squadron, set to take up fleet support for an Australian naval vessel in the maritime exercise Starfish off the coast of Singapore. For 2 weeks they'll fight with and against squads from Malaysia, Singapore, Great Britain and New Zealand in their first taste of international combat.
The youngest returned serviceman in the Anzac Day March at Toronto was 6 sailors and an officer back from the Gulf War. Some only arrived home 3 days ago. The Gulf contingent led the march from the RSL Club to the War Memorial. Following were the older veterans. In their step was a trace of the pride and discipline that marched them to front lines all over the world. Among their ranks, 88-year-old Fred Hissey, one of the celebrated Rats of Tobruk. On the 50th anniversary of their campaign, Fred recalls life in the dugouts with constant bombing raids overhead and the comrades buried on foreign fields.
We are remembering our mates who we left back in Tobruk in 1941 and all those who have passed away since.
At the memorial, a plaque from HMAS Brisbane was presented to honour Australia's role in our most recent conflict.
We're proud to be returned veterans and we wanted our plaque hanging in our local RSL.
Now to Andrew Lobb in Taree.
After a disastrous 89-90 season, which resulted in many meetings being cancelled due to inclement weather, this year has been full of high-quality racing, the odd bingle or two, and generally the competitors getting their revs out of racing. Tomorrow night, the season winds up with a spectacular program, which will include a giant demolition derby, reminiscent of the richest event ever held at the track a fortnight ago, where the prize money for the demo derby reached $16,000. It's expected that mayhem will reign as the drivers head out with the sole purpose of putting the opposition out of business in a pursuit for the payroll. The super sedans with the Pine Brothers will also compete in their last outing for the year, and they will be supported by the Formula 500s and modified hot rods.
The double-storey roller door at Eggington's car audio business on Donald Street was being replaced this morning after it was allegedly smashed open by a burglar using a stolen car as a battering ram. Security guard Alan Waitley answered an alarm call to the premises, which contained tens of thousands of dollars worth of audio stock. At first he thought the intruder was an employee until the car came crashing back out of the warehouse.
His first attempt failed and he drove forward and tried to get out again. When he finally made it out through the roller door, he hit a steel light post. At that stage he decided to go around my car When he did, he saw that there was a brick wall in front of him, so he eventually gave up.
Police have recovered a stolen vehicle from the scene. Its owner estimates damage at about $4,000. Replacement of the roller door will cost a further $3,000. A 25-year-old man appeared in Newcastle court this morning on charges of car stealing, driving without a licence, drink driving and break, enter and steal.
Adamstown Heights Infants was closed last year due to what the state government called dwindling student numbers. Despite much protest from local parents, the 1 hectare site with 2 buildings was put on the market for $300,000. Last week, the Hunter Christian Community Church put down a 10% deposit. But at a meeting the following weekend, Lake Macquarie Mayor Ivan Welsh suggested council could buy the site, and council has now adopted a mayoral minute to investigate. But another Lake Alderman, Doug Carley, says council should keep out.
It's none of our business. It's a state matter, not a local government matter.
Alderman Carley says with council cutting back on curb and guttering, investing $300,000 in property is simply a waste of ratepayers' money. Ivan Welsh says council has millions of dollars set aside for assets purchase, but admits fellow Alderman Edwards and Tousis have indicated such a move could be unethical, in effect gazumping the church bid. Meanwhile, the Christian Community Group has described council's move as inconvenient. A spokesperson for the former parents of the school see council's bid as their last chance to keep the property under public ownership. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
Robin Mossman is the Central Coast's self-appointed environmental watchdog, and she's about to start nipping at the heels of Environment Minister Tim Moore. The Central Coast Against Chemicals Resident Action Group claims this Wyong chemical plant is discharging dangerous levels of pesticides into the adjoining wetlands with the government's blessing. Analysts from the Brisbane-based firm ChemSA were asked to investigate the licence issued by the State Pollution Control Commission. Their report highlights some alarming figures. ChemCon is legally allowed to pump out organophosphates, carbamates and weedicides at levels between 80 and 700 times the limits recognised as safe for ocean outfalls. The report says this is doubly disturbing because one would have expected the conditions for discharge to the wetlands to be far stricter than those required for ocean discharge. But as can be seen, this is not the case, and in fact the reverse strategy is employed. Local residents want an explanation.
Very hard to understand, especially in view of the fact that wetlands, of course, has so little dilution compared to an ocean outfall.
They say any outfall into the wetlands will eventually end up in the Tuggerah Lake system, where it could jeopardise the local fishing industry.
Pesticides and herbicides are specifically designed to destroy life, and so any of these substances that get into a wetland system and from there have the possibility of draining into an area which is a significant fish nursery are of concern.
Environment Minister Tim Moore was today unavailable to comment on the issue, while officials at the State Pollution Control Commission were unwilling to discuss the situation until they had further investigated the figures. Bruce McKenzie, NBN News.
Andrew Malone and Billie Jean Kirk arrived in Newcastle shortly before 6 p.m, about 4 hours after leaving Hobart, where they were arrested on Friday night. The pair, accompanied by homicide detectives from Newcastle and Belmont, travelled on a regular commuter flight to be greeted by a heavy police escort, much to the bewilderment of passengers and others waiting at the airport. The two were taken in separate vehicles to Newcastle Police Station, where it's expected they will be charged with the murder of English tourist Dominic Paul Manson, whose weighted body was found in Lake Macquarie last month. The pair are expected to remain in custody overnight to appear in Newcastle Court tomorrow morning.
Andrew Malone and Billie Jean Kirk arrived in Newcastle shortly before 6 p.m, about 4 hours after leaving Hobart, where they were arrested on Friday night. The pair were accompanied by homicide detectives from Newcastle and Belmont. They travelled on a regular commuter flight and were greeted by a heavy police escort, much to the bewilderment of passengers and others waiting at the airport. The two were taken in separate cars to Newcastle Police Station, where tonight they were charged with the murder of Dominic Paul Manson. The pair will remain in custody overnight and should appear in Newcastle Court tomorrow morning.
But that Robin Hood used to.
It was a day of fine-tuning for Justin Barham as he prepared to make the long trek south to Winton in Victoria for the vital third round of the Australian production car series.
At the moment we're equal first in the front-wheel drive class in the Australian production car series, and this weekend if we can get a win in our class we'll be right there on top.
No one will be more shocked than Barham himself if he does eventually win the front-wheel drive class. He's done most of his driving in rally cars, and his dirt sliding experience is worth next to nothing on a tarred track. He insists he'll only improve as the year goes on, and that's bad news for the opponents who are already chasing him home.
The more rounds we do, the more practice we do, we're finding we're fine-tuning the car just that little bit, plus I'm developing my driving skills each time better and better, so we're quite confident that throughout the year we'll come out pretty well on top.
I've got a foil. Oh, really? What do you want? Longest wire, right?
When he was just 2 days old, Sean was diagnosed as having heart problems. Up until 12 months ago, he'd been on daily medication to stop his heart from failing. He'd been unable to run around, play and swim like other children, and he'd never swung a cricket bat. That's all behind him, thanks to a rare and complex operation. The two main arteries of Sean's heart were back to front. An operation corrected this and a donor valve was inserted. A dacron or silk wall was implanted between the two main heart chambers.
And the nice thing is that his two pumping chambers are doing what they were designed to do originally.
Well, it makes me feel like a normal kid.
Sean underwent a checkup in the John Hunter Hospital today with heart specialists and got the all clear. The sandy-haired youngster will be a familiar face in many households from next week. He stars with heart transplant recipient Fiona Coote in a Heart Foundation fundraising commercial. Sean enjoyed his brush with show business.
It makes me give something back to the Heart Foundation and the doctors and that, what they've done for me.
The group of 13 has taken the unusual step of forming its own company called Building Strength. It's producing seals for large garbage bins. Through an extension of the Young Achievers program, this fledgling workforce will gain some practical experience in the real world of business.
It's to enable apprentices to learn business skills so that when they complete their apprenticeship, they can possibly start their own business or at least appreciate the problems that the businesses they work for have in survival.
The group has been given 7 months to establish a company, make and market a product and hopefully return a profit to shareholders before it is voluntarily wound up. 24-year-old Michael Considine is an apprentice electrician with the Hunter Water Board. He hopes this course will help him avoid the traps when he ventures into his own business.
Already I've learned about overcapitalising. We may border on overcapitalising, so I'm learning about that, how to keep our shares in that to a minimum.
These apprentices could be the advance guard on paving the way for Australia becoming the clever country. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
This is being illustrated in Newcastle this week, where rescue squad personnel from the Marrickville headquarters are conducting an occupational health and safety course. The pupils are radio technicians belonging to the police force throughout the northern part of the state. 9 of them from Dubbo, Tamworth, Port Macquarie and Newcastle are learning the latest techniques of clambering over radio towers, such as this 47-metre example at the Waterboard Lookout above Blackbutt. While some of these police technicians have been climbing towers like this for years, there's always a better way, new equipment and hazards to be wary of.
They work in such isolated areas at times. There is not the people there at hand to actually get them out of their own situation, so they've got to be able to do it for themselves.
Senior Constable Greatorex is one rescue squad man who doesn't believe his organisation will disappear, despite plans for most of its role to be taken over by the fire brigade.
It's going to take some time. There's other practices that have got to be put into place. Other people have got to be trained to do the work that we will no longer be doing if that actually happens. But there will always, as far as I can see, there will always be a police rescue squad.
Before the $5 billion contract was signed in August 1989, Amacon said that Newcastle would receive $700 million in work. This figure was used repeatedly at the time by the Prime Minister and Defence Minister Kim Beazley to illustrate that Newcastle hadn't really lost.
It will substantially add to work in Newcastle as it is implemented through time. A considerable amount of work as outlined here. Some 58 work packages, worth about $700 million, it's worth about 1,200 jobs.
New Zealand was also promised around 20% of the work. Already it has been allocated $200 million, with $167 million of that awarded in the last week. Liberal Senator John Tierney believes this is just the beginning. In a statement released today, Mr Tierney points out that a $4 million contract won by ComSteel is the only frigate work Newcastle has received. He goes on to say, that's a start, but where is the other $696 million worth of work promised by the Labor government to the Hunter? In reply, federal member for Newcastle Alan Morris says that tenders for specific work in the region have not yet been called.
The actual steel cutting for the first Anzac ship will not start till next year. The expectation of tenders of the kind that Newcastle's involved in won't be let until either late next year or up till late this year till late next year.
According to Mr Morris, the work is definitely there. The question is, will Newcastle be able to provide a tenderer? Two of the three companies who were to vie for the work will no longer do so. Carrington Slipways is no longer in business, and Gavenge, a consortium of local heavy engineering firms, has indicated it will not submit a tender. That leaves just Eglo Engineering or perhaps a new consortium.
Carrington Slipways does provide a potential platform for a frigate bid of some magnitude. Because of that, we've been approaching companies from outside Newcastle because there aren't any here big enough or interested enough to get involved. Right now, there are some very serious investigations going on by companies, and one in particular that I'm quite optimistic about.
It was business as usual at the Newcastle wool sales today, but growers say this once booming industry faces ruin.
This time next year, unless prices improve quite considerably, that there could be anything up to 50-60% of wool growers out of business, completely out of business.
Primary Industries Minister Kerin has announced the Wool Corporation will be replaced by 3 new bodies. The floor price scheme will be removed permanently, and growers will have to pay a 15% tax on production.
I was disappointed with the 15% tax. I thought that was a bit high. I thought that we're hopeful that 12 would have been high enough.
Without the artificial support of the floor scheme, wool prices have been halved. Top this with the new tax and statewide drought conditions, and the industry faces what government admits is the biggest crisis in modern times. Mr Kerin has said a $2.8 billion debt of the Australian Wool Corporation is to be repaid over 7 years. Income earned through the sale of 5 million bales in stockpile, plus the sale of AWC property and the new wool tax. Analysts say there is some hope, predicting a rise in the market with overseas buyers keen to cash in on the world's cheapest wool. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
"24-year-old Alana Walsh died on Anzac Day, the victim of what police describe as a particularly vicious attack. They say she was stabbed 9 times in the chest, abdomen and head at this Lusconway home in Belmont North. According to police, she was living in a de facto relationship with 26-year-old Peter Dundas at the time. On Monday, in Newcastle Court, charged with Ms Walsh's murder, police alleged Dundas had expressed a desire to commit suicide and feared retribution from friends of the victim. Bail was not applied for and he was placed in protective custody. Today in Belmont Local Court, counsel for Dundas, Sushil Patel, applied for bail, saying, "My client has every desire to survive and live." Mr Patel further submitted that the defendant's family, present in court, would supervise Mr Dundas. But Magistrate Michael Morahan refused Dundas bail based on the prosecution's allegations. He ordered Mr Dundas remain in protective custody and remanded him to reappear in court on June the 6th.